Hey folks, it's Woody here at USMA Blade, just coming to you from the shop this afternoon. Doing something a little different today. This is a video about tips and tricks on how to replace the scale on your Hinderer knives. And the reason for this video is twofold. There's one, because we've had a ton of new customers, ton of new buyers buying Hinderers lately. And so we're trying to get as much information out there as possible. And while we usually do full takedown and breakdown videos and reassembly, a lot of people, and then the second reason for the video is because of all the new scales coming out, and a lot of people just want to be able to replace their scale and are a little nervous about trying it for the first time. So hopefully this is a video that'll be able to help you out. These are just tips and tricks that we've learned over the years from all the customizing and anodizing of Hinderers we've done. So hopefully they'll help, but we'll see. So let's just kind of jump into it here. I am, for the sake of this video, going to use an armorer toolkit. I know there are plenty of videos out there and suggestions out there about how to make your own tools and everything else. Doesn't really matter what you use, just as long as it fits and it's not going to tear up any of your hardware or your scale. So I like the armorer kit because it is actually manufactured to fit everything perfectly. So to start in, this is my own Hinderer. This is the XM18 3.5 Spanto. Currently I have the Burgundy Micarta smooth scale on it. I'm going to switch it over to my natural textured Micarta. And this is the new S45 version. So to start off, probably the most important thing I can tell you is out of the box, this is going to come with tip down carry. I prefer tip up carry. Doesn't matter where you have your pocket clip at, take it off. It's going to make working with the knife a whole lot easier. So you're going to have to forgive me. There's a couple things here. One, I'm working from behind the camera, so it's a little awkward for me. And then two, there's two different ways, two different types of people who take knives apart in my experience. One is those that are used to working with the knife up and holding it off the mat. And then two are people who like to put it flat on the mat and work with the knife on the mat. Excuse me. So I am actually one that typically works up off the mat. But those that like to work up off the mat are in the minority. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to try and show all these tips and tricks while working flat on the mat, which is a little more awkward than what I'm used to doing. During this video also, we're going to show you what happens if some things go wrong, what to do and how to fix them. So hopefully some of that will help as well. All right, so we're just going to jump right into it. The most important thing to start, once you've gotten your pocket clip off, leave all your scale screws tight on the knife, everything else. Now, if this is your first time taking your Hinderer apart, there is probably going to be some blue Loctite on that pivot. Like we're getting out of focus here. There's probably going to be some blue Loctite on that pivot. So it may be a little difficult to get the pivot off. And truthfully, especially if it's your first time taking a Hinderer apart, this is usually the toughest part. So I always start on the pivot nut side, or the lock side as you can call it, and get everything set in here with my Hinderer tool, and then get my other side set in. And for this, it is easier and better to be up off the mat. If you've got a lot of Loctite on here, this can be a really hard turn. And sometimes it's going to help. Sometimes you even have to put some pliers on this and then get the leverage off of the nut side to turn it. But once you start breaking it free, sometimes that Loctite can hold and be tough, and you can be struggling the whole way getting this pivot screw out. And that's just part of getting the pivot screw out the first time. You don't have to put that much Loctite on them, but you know, if you're worried about it backing out, then you should. So blue Loctite, by the way, do not use red Loctite. All right, so get your pivot screw out, then set your knife back down. Now, so this is going to hold everything in here, and everything's good to go. You can just make sure you don't push your pivot nut out. Keep it flat. From here, you could still open the knife. Now, some people are going to say, hey, just keep the knife open and work with it from there. What I don't like about that is when you reassemble, the lock is going to adjust over. So I actually prefer to put my knife flat. And then as I do, I start at the bottom and take my screws apart. The reason I do that, I like to keep the center screw in here and tight as long as I can. So getting all of these off. Now, as I get to this last screw, you'll notice this whole time I'm keeping pressure on that scale. So keep the pressure on there, because if you don't, this whole thing's gonna pop up because of the pressure of that lock. So from here, I kind of transition and put pressure down here on the blade, move one scale, keeping that pressure on the blade, and then put the other scale back on, keeping pressure down. And immediately get that pressure, transfer the pressure from here, use your other fingers, and get pressure up on the scale. That keeps everything tight, keeps everything from coming loose. And then from here, I like to get this first handle screw back in. And that one I actually tighten the whole way. I always say just get everything to where it's slightly snug and then tighten up at the end, but that one I do go ahead and get pretty tight. From here, get your pivot screw back in. A lot of times if you've got Loctite on it, you're gonna have to actually screw it in the whole way using the tool. Ooh, this is a weird angle for me to be at. And probably weird for you guys to look at because you can't really see anything but my big meat hooks. So from here, get that tightened back down, but snug, not over tight. Now, get your other screws in. Now, pull those out. Everything's just snug, it's not tight. Check my action. Biggest thing to check is your stop pin. See if I can show this very well. So see how that stop pin is in there and it's snug. You might have a little gap on one side, just a tiny little gap. That's not abnormal, but I'll show you what you don't want to have in a minute. From here, check your centering. This is where, from here, you can also pull your pivot screw back out and put some blue Loctite on it and put it back in. And see how as I move that, it changes my centering. But once I get that nice and snug, I'm set. So I can now pull it back out, put some blue Loctite on it. I also like to just make sure I get all my screws one last turn. Don't want to drive around in the car with one of the lug nuts loose. And there you go, sitting centered. Action's good. No blade play. Lockup's perfect. Everything on it's great. So let's go over, and now before I forget it, if you are one of those that likes to work in the air like I am, you do everything I just did, except during this process, you got to keep your fingers. So what I do is I keep 1, 2, 3 fingers over those handle nuts to keep them from falling out. So okay guys, I finally got this to be uncooperative, which is pretty comical since that's not what we typically want in the video. But I got my pivot back on and got everything tightened back up, and you'll notice, hopefully you can see it in here. See how my stop pin is sitting really awkward in there? Now I tightened everything up, which was my first mistake. So what I have to do is go back and loosen my pivot up just a little, and then loosen, especially this first screw. You can loosen the second one and the third just ever so slightly. And you don't have to break down everything on the knife again. And a lot of times you can just get this back in there just by pushing. But sometimes it doesn't want to cooperate. And normally you can look and see where it's wrong and just give it a little push one way or the other. And while you're doing that, you're squeezing. And when you do, you'll notice that's back in there now. So, but just a little, sometimes it'll get hung up. And if that happens, it throws everything off center on the knife. So, and you definitely want your stop pin to work. So make sure it's in there right. See, it's in there right now. And then from there, you're just tightening everything back up, get it slightly snug, and then work your way around to what we showed you earlier, getting it back. I'll go ahead and do it just in case we cut that part out and put it back in. Get it back to where you can look at it and adjust your pivot for center. And then you can pull your pivot screw back out, put Loctite on it, and you're all set. Make sure you got no blade play, your lockup's good, and you're set. All right, folks, there's one last thing I want to hit you with before we're done with this video, and that is switching out. Say you've got your G10, your Micarta, whatever you've got on here, carbon fiber, and you want to switch it out to, say, full tie or copper or brass. So get your knife back to where this point is, and then get that last screw out. And once again, you're keeping pressure here on the scale with both fingers, moving one down to the knife, and this time you're removing both the scale and the liner, keeping everything still pressure on there. And then if you are putting copper or brass on, you're going to have a washer that you put here to keep it from running into it. So don't forget to put the liner on. And then, but if you're, I'm sorry, not the liner, the spacer on. But from here, you just put the entire tie scale on. So there's no need for a liner when you're putting on full tie, copper or brass. And then just follow the same steps as earlier. You know, transferring the pressure back to the scale and keeping everything nice and tight. And I always like to get that screw on first and tighten it up, like I showed you guys earlier. And then get this pivot screw in. And then there's one other thing I wanted to show you before we call it the end of this video. So now watch this. I cut away and did a separate take showing you guys what happens if your stop pin gets goofy. And then cutting away and doing a separate take for the tie scale and one other thing. And watch, this time the stop pin will be goofy. So nope, stop pin went in just fine. Now let's say that for whatever reason you pick your knife up and you forgot to put your last two, tighten your last two screws in. Then this isn't a big deal. You don't have to break everything back down if you don't want to. From here, you can just slightly loosen that other handle screw and then slide your spacers in from the back. And they, on this full tie, they slide around more. On the liner, they don't slide around as much. But once you start sliding it in, just use your fingers and pinch and put some pressure on it. And get it close to in there where you can see the hole coming through. Get your handle nut and it goes into the back. All you're doing is just putting pressure on it because the hole isn't fitting quite right. And then take your bit, and it's hard for me to do behind the camera, but as you just slide it around, it should, well, if I could see it, should pop in. There it goes, popped right in. So you can just do them one at a time. This is also a simple way to just switch out hardware. If you don't want to break down the whole knife, all you're doing is just changing your handle hardware or your standoffs or something. You can just do them one at a time. But if you tighten, I just tighten that screw up too tight on that second screw. You got to keep them a little loose to be able to sneak these in. And another one in here. Adjust it. Move it around just a little, pops right in. So that'll save some of you some time when, you know, if you make a mistake, you don't have to break it all the way back down, set everything down, put it back in. You don't have to deal with any of that stuff. So once again, just check our centering. Nope. Centering's good. We're good and tight. Go ahead and tighten the rest of my handle screws up. We're good there. Just a little too tight. And no blade play, everything's great. So I won't forget to put my pocket clip back on. I'll do that in just a minute. So there it is, and that's switching out a handle or scale on the Hinderer XM 18 3.5. I hope this helps. We've got some really cool micarta scales in stock right now, some cool Spantos in stock right now. We're always getting new Hinderers in and new parts coming and new scales coming. So keep an eye out. They're all available at usamadeblade.com. And as always, folks, we appreciate you watching.